Good morning and welcome to the Planning and Placemaking Committee of the 15th of November 2023. I'm Councillor Ian Massey, convener of this committee, and joining me on the top table today are from my far left, Councillor Grant Stewart, my vice convener, Miss Jessica Gill, committee officer, Mr Colin Elliott, solicitor, and on my right, Mr Christian Smith, development management and building standards services manager, Mr Sean Panton, team leader. I've done it. Well done, Ian. No, it's not. It's Mr. Paul Williamson, team leader, the local developments. And then sitting next to him is Mr. Sean Panton, team leader, major developments. Housekeeping again, as this is a hybrid meeting, members joining virtually are reminded that if you leave the meeting during consideration of any application, you are unable to participate or vote on that item when you return to the meeting. This also means that if a member loses their internet connection during consideration of an item, they should not vote on that item. Please advise a client via the meeting chat that you are leaving the meeting, or if you have lost your connection and are therefore unable to vote on that item. And whilst we are operating as a hybrid meeting for the proceedings today, can I remind councillors and officers to use the chat box to attract my attention, which all members should have access to. Q for questions, C for comment. I will now ask the clerk to confirm any apologies and attendance of those in the chamber and online. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. We have apologies today from Councillor Reid. We have 4 members online. I'll ask to confirm they're present, please. Councillor Braun.
I'm here, Jess, present.
Councillor Harvey.
Present.
Councillor James.
Morning, Jess, I'm here.
And Councillor Leishman.
Good morning, I'm present.
Thank you. All other members are present in the chambers, convener.
I see a point of order from Councillor Cuthbert. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I'm just wondering if we feel we're competent to proceed, given that the website, the planning portal, was down yesterday. I was incapacitated last week with an abscess, so I didn't get any work done last week. So I went on yesterday, couldn't get on all day, managed to get on at 4 o'clock. I wondered if other members had managed to get on and realised it was back up again at 4 o'clock yesterday.
I myself went on to the portal at 9:30, well 9 o'clock, and it was working then, but by 9:30 when I needed to look at something, it was down. It was down from 9:30 till about 4 o'clock, as you say. I believe that we have had enough time to look at this. I understand that you were not feeling great, but that we have had 9 days of the papers being up in front of us. So I believe that we have had enough time. Any rest of the committee want to make any comment on that? Councillor Rick.
Convener, thank you. My belief it was to do with some updates getting run, and if we can just ask and just check that pre-committee that we kind of get a rule, or wherever possible we don't run updates when we're coming up to committee. If it is possible to get a commitment for that in future, that would be appreciated.
Yes, I think that would be definitely something that we should actually do, and it should have been done. But I do believe that we were, and there was a indication that this was going to happen. I didn't see it, but I believe there was an indication that this was going to be done yesterday. At least it only took a day rather than the 2 days that it was supposed to be down. So I'm certainly glad of that. If there is no motion, then I think we will continue. So the first application before, oh no, sorry, declarations of interest. Do you have any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. The minutes of the Planning and Placemaking Committee of the 11th of October 2023, are the committee content with that minute? Deputations, we've got Deputations today at the committee agreeable to hear deputations on item 521 and 522. Thank you. Applications for determination. Major application. The first application is for the erection or replacement polytunnels in part retrospect at Colbeggy Farm, Kettins, Blair Gowrie. And to introduce the report is Mr. Panton. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, councillors. As stated, the first item on the agenda today is for the erection of replacement polytunnels at Colbeggy Farm by Cooper Angus. The application is in part retrospect as the applicant was unaware of the requirement for planning permission. Following an enforcement investigation, a planning application was invited to regularise the development. It is worth noting that no objections have been received regarding the development, and the application is only before the Planning and Placemaking Committee today, as it constitutes a major development due to the extent of the site area. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here we have a location plan. Colbeggy Farm is situated to the east of Cooper Angus and is located on a branch road linking the hamlet of Market Hill and the village of Ardler. The topography of the site is generally flat and extends to approximately 14.5 hectares. The site is primarily surrounded by other agricultural uses. Next slide, please. This plan shows a sectional view of the existing polytunnels. As seen, these polytunnels are relatively standard and are not uncommon in agricultural settings. Next slide, please. We now have a sectional view of the new polytunnels. As seen, they are slightly higher than the previous tunnels, which in turn allows more space to grow crops and to work more efficiently. The tunnels are suitable for intensive cultivation and have enhanced ventilation, which allows for temperature control to make growing seasons more flexible and adaptable to weather conditions. Next slide, please. This is the existing site plan where you can see the general arrangement of Colbeggy Farm. You can see the existing road passing through the site in a diagonal fashion to the south. Next slide, please. We now have a proposed site plan. As seen, the layout is broadly similar to the existing. The orange shaded area denotes a protection area for a National Grid high pressure pipeline. The National Grid originally objected to this application, as initially there was no protection area. However, now that this safety inclusion zone has been included, the National Grid have now removed their objection. I will now take members through a series of recent photographs taken on Tuesday last week. It's not changed on our yet. We all got the photograph on the screen. I'll just wait a moment.
Do those online have the photograph of the building?
Yes, we do, Ian. It's all here clear. That's us got it in the chamber now. So this first photograph, here is the existing access to Colbeggy Farm and the associated farm shop. None of this is to be altered by the proposed development. Next image, please. Hopefully. This next photograph shows one of the new tunnels which has already been erected. You can just make out the older tunnels in the background of the image. Next slide, please. This image shows the same tunnels as the previous image, but now shows the end of the units. Next slide, please. Okay, well, the next photo when it appears is one of the inside of the tunnels where you can see the intense cultivation that the new tunnels can provide. And the final photograph after that, yeah, in the chamber, we've now got the inside one. Yeah, this final photograph shows the tunnels when viewed from the nearby access road. You can see that these tunnels are not highly obtrusive and do not detract from the character or amenity of the area. Next slide, please. Thank you, convener. That now concludes my presentation. I will leave members with the proposed site plan for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Patton. Can I ask, do members have any questions for officers? Councillor James.
There's a surprise, convener? It was I don't know, I suppose everybody's thinking it. I just wondered why this needed planning permission, because as an agricultural building, I thought if it was so far away from the road and of a certain area, it didn't need permission anyway. And if it's removable, which I would imagine looking at it, it pretty much is. Just seem, we live in Perthshire where fruit growing is the norm, and it just I've not seen this at planning before, and I just wondered why. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. I think I'll keep it as brief as possible. There are certain levels of construction that you can make in relation to agricultural activity, but this one exceeds it. If you saw the presentation there, we had some difficulties in the chamber. These are quite significant structures, maybe not what people would normally relate to being polytunnels and things, so exceeds what would normally be allowed without the requirement for planning permission under permitted development rights. I think it's class 18. So these are quite substantial structures of significance and therefore require planning permission exceeding the permitted development rights.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I've just been asked by residents in the area as to why the enforcement action took 5 years to come to this point, and why it wasn't done quicker.
Yeah, so when we first were advised of the breach of planning, it wasn't a high priority on the planning enforcement agenda, purely because, as Councillor James just stated, it's one of those things where a lot of people wouldn't actually think planning permission is required. But we did investigate. The submission of a major application does take a lot of time. They obviously have to do their pre-application consultation, events and the likes. So by the time you add everything up, it is a lengthy process. But like I say, it wasn't a high priority for us because it is something that a lot of people would generally not consider to require planning permission anyway.
So if I maybe add to that as well, if you look at our charter in relation to enforcement activity, what we're not there to do is to punish mistakes or failings. As you'll see as well, we're recommending approval of this development. We saw it was acceptable, but we were working with the applicants to make sure that it was regularised, and that's what we have before us today. So to take it beyond what we were doing would require us to serve a notice, which might be seen as unnecessarily punitive.
I can also just expand slightly on why the application itself has taken so long to determine. So you'll see on the plan in front of you that kind of orange protection zone at the top. As I said in my presentation, that's a high pressure pipeline. When the application first came in, the National Grid originally objected to the application just because of the works over the pipeline. So we had to work quite extensively with the National Grid to make sure that there was a scheme there that they were happy with. But now with this zone that's proposed and where the legs of the tunnels are, they're happy with it and they've removed their objection. So that was why the application itself has been quite a considerable time to get to this committee.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, thank you, convener. Yeah, just on that subject to do with the pipeline protection there, can you just describe what protection is there? Is it a kind of mattress or something like that? Thanks.
Yes, I can clarify that for you, Councillor Harvey. So no, there's no mat or anything like that. It's just purely where the legs of the tunnels will be drilled into the ground, and the applicant is now aware of what they have to do in consultation with the National Grid. So the National Grid were just really concerned that if any of these legs went in too far in that location, it would go into the pipeline, but they're now happy with where all the legs of the tunnels are proposed.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? No further questions, then I propose to move this paper to grant permission. Do we have any amendment? Or seconder Bailey McLaren, thank you. Do you have any amendment? No? Right. So I'll confirm that planning permission is therefore granted, subject to conditions within the port handling. But can I ask Mr. Panton that he looks at conditions 4 and 5 and maybe tidies them up a bit, the tree planting and also the when it becomes redundant. Maybe talk to that just a second, please, Mr. Panton.
Yes, so just for clarity for members, condition 4 is currently worded about a planting scheme, and the scheme shall be implemented to the satisfaction of the Council's Planning Authority. We can add a tail piece on there that if it fails to become established within 5 years that it's replanted. And with condition 5, we can just clarify the condition we're looking for when we're looking for the site to be reinstated should they become redundant.
Thank you, Mr. Panton. So the planning permission is granted, subject to the condition contained in the report and added with the update from Mr. Panton. Thank you. We now move on to local applications, and the first application is for the erection of a dwelling house, formation of parking and associated works at land 40 metres north-east of Birchwood Cottage, St Mary's Road, Burnham. And to introduce the report is Mr. Williamson. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, councillors. As stated, the second item on the agenda today is for the erection of a contemporary dwelling on land just off St Mary's Road within the settlement and conservation area of Burnham. The application site is presently occupied by 3 disused holiday lodges of octagonal form with timber walls. The wider site is relatively overgrown in light of the disused status. The site sits between the residential developments of Robertson Court to the south and Kirkview to the west. To the north, beyond a steep treed embankment, is Dunaird House, a listed building, while to the southeast is Birchwood Cottage. The application has been referred to the Planning and Placemaking Committee today, as it was in receipt of 9 letters of objection, as outlined in the committee report. Next slide, please. First, we see an aerial extract of the site, showing the location in relation to the Perth Road, the River Tay, and also the Erigmore Caravan Park, which is located to the east of St Mary's Road. Next slide, please. This next drawing is the site plan, which shows the arrangement of linked forms, which collectively would create the new 5-bedroom dwelling house on site. The positioning of the development broadly sits over the positioning of the 3 existing lodges, albeit admittedly over a greater footprint. The plan also illustrates the steep embankment to the north, which has significant tree cover, the provision of garden ground and drainage to the west, and the utilisation of the existing access from St Mary's Road. Next slide, please. We now have a sectional view of the dwelling house from the south. Towards Robertson Court and the adjacent dwelling at Birchwood Cottage. It too shows the site's positioning beneath Dunaird House and the level of St Mary's Road. It also shows the significant landscape setting within which the dwelling would sit. Materials for the development would include black painted timber cladding, black brick and sedum green roofs. Next slide, please. Next, we see the proposed ground floor plan. This shows the stepped arrangement of the building. It shows the provision of the 5 bedrooms all on the ground floor level, in addition to a kitchen, dining room, small snug office and plant rooms. The first floor would contain a larger living room, further open plan kitchen, dining area and an external terrace. Next slide, please. This plan shows a section between Robertson Court on the left-hand side, through the site and wider embankment rising up to Dunaird House on the right-hand side. Members will note that the height of the dwelling would be stepped with single storey closest to Robertson Court and Birchwood Cottage, then rising to 2 storeys adjacent to the rising topography. Next slide, please. Furthermore, this is taken from the opposite side to the west and also illustrates the associated change in levels, but also how the scale of the dwelling would be no larger than the ridge line of properties on Robertson Court. In addition, although this may be harder for members to see, the section also shows how the design utilises high-level glazing so as to avoid any undue privacy impacts to adjacent property. Next slide, please. Related to the previous slide, this plan seeks to show how privacy has been designed into the development, whilst also providing adequate levels of light into the property. Next slide, please. This last slide shows the visualisation of the development provided by the applicant. This would be an indicative view from the east looking into the site. I will now take members through a series of photographs taken by both the agent and contained within the design statement, as well as site visit photos by the case officer from May. Next slide, please. This first photograph is taken from a similar position to that used for the previous visualisation. This gives an indication of the winter landscape with foliage fallen from the adjacent trees. The existing lodges can be seen stepping along the boundary of the site. Next slide, please. These next two photographs show the lodges as they are currently seen. It's clear that they have been unused for some time and are considerably below standards of other more modern holiday accommodation. The photos also give an indication as to some of the wider tree cover to the embankment and towards Robertson Court. Next slide, please. These next photos are taken from within the site, looking towards Birchwood Cottage. As can be seen, there is a stone wall to the boundary and the gable elevations have minimal openings and also intervening structures within parts of the garden ground. Next slide, please. We now move to a final set of photos showing the relationship between the existing lodges and properties on Robertson Court, including intervening tree cover. Next image, please. Thank you, convener. That now concludes my presentation. I will leave members with the proposed site plan for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. We do have deputations on this item, so I'll now hand over to the Vice Convener for the deputations procedure. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Can I call on Mr. Wiley? Mr. Wiley, while you're coming up, you have 10 minutes for your deputation, and I'll give you a prompt after 9 minutes for you to sum up. So whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Good morning, councillors. I live in Birchwood Cottage, which is the closest house to the site. A couple of preliminary remarks. While I and my neighbours have always felt that this site has the potential for a suitably located and sized and designed house, this proposal does not achieve that. I'll refer you briefly to the title of the application, which mentions a distance of 40 metres between my house and the site. At its closest, the back of my house is just 3 metres from the boundary wall. If you go 40 metres straight across the site, you'll be up in the woods. So I don't want you to be misled by that figure in the title. My house is much closer than 40 metres. One other point I'd make is that relates to informative D9 in your papers. Although it would appear that there's no formal requirement to notify those of us who had previously made submissions, the additional documentation had been submitted, as it was in June. It would have been a courtesy to let us know that there was additional documentation that had been submitted, and that didn't happen. We found out late and by chance. Two main reasons for objecting to the proposal, and they are firstly, residential amenity concerns, and secondly, conservation area issues. On residential amenity, and this is paragraphs 43 to 45 in your paper, the basic issue is that the height of the proposed two-storey building, which you'll have seen clearly on slides 3 and 5, in the elevations that you've just been shown, and the south-facing windows in it, together with the proposed location in relation to Birchwood Cottage and its garden, as well as to an extent that of 5 Robertson Court, my immediate neighbour, do mean that most of the windows will directly overlook my garden area, some at an angle with number 5 Robertson Court. It's not just a matter of distance from the boundary, which is just under 13 metres, and which in itself for the ground floor is okay. but the fact that the height of the windows on the two-story main building, the midpoint of those is at least 5 meters above ground level. And I think one of the sectional elevations you saw showed that very clearly that there would be downward view over the wall, which is about 2 meters high, into the garden. I dispute, therefore, that this is termed in para 38 a modest height. This is not modest height. These are windows on a second floor, which by virtue of their position will look right down into the garden, most of them. It's also admitted in the paper that the single-story building elements are closer to the boundary than is normally permitted. And this relates to my neighbours in 4 and 5 Robertson Court as well. But because they're without windows overlooking, it doesn't really matter. However, having a construction like that so close to the boundary definitely constitutes loss of visual amenity as far as the neighbours are concerned, despite the suggestion that it will be screened by a new hedge. On that point, anything other than the present ley landi will take a long time to grow. And indeed, the proposed new hedge does not extend along all of the boundary wall. I therefore, councillors, disagree with the paper's contention that there would be, this is para 44, no harmful overlooking. That there is overlooking seems to be conceded. That's the main point. Harmful or not, matter of judgment. In our judgment, and in mine in particular, I think the overlooking is an adverse effect on my residential amenity and my privacy, and to an extent that of number 5 Robertson Court, with the proximity amenity effect an additional factor. But it's the overlooking by the windows which is the big one, and would very directly affect my residential amenity in my garden. Coming on to conservation area issues. The design, and as you've seen, box-like appearance of the proposed buildings, while held to fit well with a woodland setting on their own, are completely out of keeping with the surrounding traditional rural style of housing of various ages. Myself, Robertson Court, Dunaird House above, and as such are, in our view, just not suitable for a site within the Burnham Conservation Area. Para 54 discusses conservation area primarily in relation to the listed Dunaird House, which sits up behind and above the site, but barely with reference to any of the other properties on the other side of the site, myself and the Robertson Court residents. The requirement of the relevant Planning Act, which is mentioned in para 31, quotes, to pay special attention to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of the designated conservation area, close quote. In our view, therefore, has not been observed or satisfied. These just are not right within a conservation area. I'd like to mention one other point, which relates to the proposed noise condition number 8. Should it be consented, and I hope very much that it's not going to be consented, I'd like to propose a couple of amendments to that, that 11 p.m. become 9 p.m. and that there be no work at all between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. That's as an aside. As I say, I hope very much that you will not consent to this. I did say, councillors, in originally objecting to this in April, that it might be worth recommending that the applicants withdraw it in order to permit discussion with both resident neighbours and with the planning authority through a pre-application consultation. Neither of these things happened. No discussion at all, even with your own officers. And an opportunity missed. There is certainly an opportunity for a house that is right on this site, but this is not it. And I urge you, for the reasons that I've stated, to refuse the application as it stands. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley. Are you willing to take questions from members?
Certainly, Vice Convener.
If members would like to enter questions into the chat box. Bailey Williamson.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Alistair, you mentioned earlier that about the removal of the Leyland High hedge and the subsequent proposals for tree planting. If there was a different form of tree planting or landscaping put in place, which would secure your visual amenity or replace it quicker, would that be acceptable to you?
Yes, difficult to know, councillor, without seeing a very specific proposal. In principle, perhaps yes, but the applicants had plenty of opportunity to discuss with us as well as with your officers about things like this and didn't take it.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thanks very much, Mr. Wiley, for your presentation there. Just a quick question. I'm assuming your house is the one that's directly south of the development, as with this map that's up on the screen here. Yeah.
That's correct, councillor.
Okay, right. Okay, that's fine. Okay, thanks. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Councillor James.
Thanks very much, Vice Convener. Mr. Wiley, thanks for your presentation. Just a quick question with regard to the residential amenity. In paragraph 43 of our papers, the last sentence says, in addition, the rear north-facing windows of Birchwood Cottage do not serve habitable rooms and are obscured by a variety of outbuildings. Is that a correct statement, Mr. Wiley? Thank you.
Thanks, councillor. On the gable end of my kitchen, which is the closest bit to the boundary, there are no windows. On the other part of the house, there are both ground floor. There's a ground floor window in what is an old kitchen, which is low enough and is obscured by sheds and things, so it's not an issue. Above that, on the first floor, well, it's a 1.5-story house. There's a small upstairs bathroom window, and which itself, in fact, overlooks what would be part of the driveway to the site. And there's a Velux window, which in the nature of Veluxes looks up rather than down. Not an issue there as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and thank you, Mr. Wiley, for your presentation. My question is very simple. You mentioned you were talking about the construction of the property out of step with the design and appearance of houses around. This is a new property, obviously. Construction methods have changed. Would you not accept that in this 21st century now, with climate change and whatever, construction methods and construction design has to change because of the mitigation that's needed to make houses more energy efficient, and that we're going to have to accept this change of style?
Thanks, councillor. As an active member of our local Climate Cafe and Climate Action Hub, I'm delighted to see any new construction methods which will act to reduce carbon emissions, etc., etc. You can have that, and it's nice to see that the proposed design is eco-friendly, if you like, but without compromising on having a design which is more in keeping with the more traditional style of the houses around. I think I'll leave it at that, thanks. It should be possible to design it to be more in keeping while being energy efficient and all the rest of the things that we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley. Thank you, Vice Convener.
Councillor Allen.
Good morning, Mr. Wiley. Thank you for your presentation. Can I ask you just to help us understand how you feel about the site as it currently stands? And are you fairly supportive of there being a development on that site, or are you objectionable to the whole scheme? Thank you.
Thanks, councillor. No, as I made very clear, we feel that there should be a possibility of having an appropriate type of housing on this site. Right now, it's an overgrown mess. The old chalets have not been in use for over 15 years, I would say. Previous owners of Dunaird House did at one time apply to put new chalets on the ground, but that was, and we didn't have any problem with that. That was withdrawn. More recently, and this is the one that's referred to in the application history, there was a proposal for on the corner of the site, which is the widest bit, at an angle off the back of my house, what can only be described as an unusual monstrosity of a 3-story glass edifice. Not surprising, the applicants were advised that the planners would be minded to refuse it, and they withdrew and didn't come back. It's got great possibility for good housing in a way that would fit well on the site and be quite okay for me and all of the rest of us, and would very much like to see the site well developed, while keeping in mind the importance of wildlife habitat and so on. It's a big enough site to be able to respect that, as well as having some good housing on it. But this one isn't right. I'm certainly not opposing the idea of housing on it. In some ways, would like to see it. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer. That's quite comprehensive. Thank you for that. In terms of an alternative design, are you objectionable to a 2-story design with windows overlooking the other units, or do you have your own ideas about that?
Not sure, Councillor, if this is a place to give my views on something else which is not before you for consideration. In general, I've always felt that something of 1.5-story size would be good, because that fits with everything else around, apart from Dunaird up on the hill behind us. This is a bit higher than that.
Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley, for your presentation. You mentioned discussions quite a few times during the presentation. Did you try to enter into discussions with the developer's agent?
Not with the agent, no, convener.
Mr. Wiley, there appears to be no further questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Thank you, councillors.
A call on Mr. and Mrs. Herberston. Good morning. You have 10 minutes for your deputation. I'll give you a prompt after 9 minutes for you to summarise. So in your own time, I'll start the clock when you start your deputation.
Well, thank you for asking me to speak. We have 2 main reasons for objection to this proposal. Our first objection really is in support of what Alistair Wiley has just been saying around the issue of the Burnham Conservation Area. Most of the listed buildings in the Burnham area were built between 1850 and 1865 in anticipation to take advantage of the new railway terminus, which was for the Highland Line at Burnham. And for a golden period, Burnham was a kind of favourite holiday destination, for example, for Beatrix Potter's family, and an alighting point for Queen Victoria and the aristocracy on their way north. The Category A listed station, the hotel, the older Perth Road housing, Birchwood, Torwood and Dunaird House all date from that period. And it's important to note what Historic Environment Scotland say in their listings for all the listed houses in this area, as Dunaird is listed as part of a grouping which includes Torwood and Birchwood. And what Historic Environment Scotland say is that this grouping is an outstanding example of an early mid-Victorian Highland resort in a setting of great natural beauty, built mainly following the opening of the Perth and Dunkeld Railway in 1856. Very completely preserved to date, St Mary's Tower and Burnham House being the only serious losses, while the only intrusion of any consequence has been a modern bungalow inserted between Burnham Hotel and Oronsay. So that's the description for that group of housing and listed buildings. So we support the building of a house on the applicant site, just as Alistair Wiley says. We very much like to see a decent house there. The site as it currently stands is a bit of an eyesore, and it should be developed properly. But given what historic environment listing is for this area and the conservation area designation, we think that any such house should be in keeping with the style and character of that Victorian Highland resort feel that Burnham has. I think that's important, not just for us as local people with houses, but also for the local businesses, the Burnham Institute. We all depend on tourism in this area for the maintenance of the local businesses and economy. And so it's not just an aesthetic matter, it's a kind of tourism and cultural matter, really. So that's our first objection, really, around the character. And just to sort of finish on that, paragraph 54 of the report says that the proposal is within Burnham Conservation Area and the setting of the B-listed Dunayard House and its associated coach house. And it says on this, the proposed house and contemporary design is well shielded from wider views by other dwelling houses. And the significant tree cover is predominantly retained. And it does say that the effect of the setting on Dunayard is minimised by its scale and positioning at the base of the steep hill atop which the listed building sits. We don't have any problem with any of that. I think that we would agree with that. It does say, as such, the proposal is not considered to adversely affect the setting of the listed building, nor adversely impact the appearance of the conservation area. We'd have a contention with that, really, because I think the style of the buildings, given the historic environment view of the area, is out of keeping. Right, so that's the first objection. The second is a point which potentially affects just Dunayard House and Torwood House and Old Pines, which are further up what we call the Old Road. While the building associated works would not affect the footprint of our house, there is a potential for a detrimental impact on the right of access through Dunayard House and onto the historic environment grouping for the Burnham area. And paragraph 55 says it's been mentioned in the public representations that the proposal would conflict with a former road approach to Torwood House. It's considered, having examined the 19th century ordnance survey mapping, that the route of that former road would have been further uphill towards Dunayard, and that the site of the proposed dwelling house, where the hill levels off briefly near the northeast edge of the application site. As such, there's no heritage concern in this respect. The Old Road, as we call it, appears in surveys dating back to the 1860s, and I've sent some further information to the committee, which I hope you've received, which details our contention that the Old Road actually sits further down than in the applicant's design statement. Torwood was built in 1850, Dunayard in 1861, not 1865, as is stated in the design statement. The Old Road would likely have been built around 1850 to provide access from the Perth Road up to Torwood, and there are actually stone steps leading up from what we consider to be the Old Road up to Dunayard House, and these stone steps are built with the same stone that Dunayard House is built, so are almost certainly the original stone steps, and they lead off the Old Road in the location we have suggested. The applicant's design statement, a new drawing has been added since the original planning application, and we only saw this last week, and it locates the Old Road higher up towards the Dunayard House, and therefore further away from the proposed development site. So we've sent a detailed description of our reasons for positioning the road further down, and in fact we actually commissioned a topographical survey by the same survey firm that the applicants used for their topographical survey, and we asked them a specific question: where is the Old Road? And they drew it in the location that we are suggesting, which is further down the bank. And given the contention of the location, our contention about the location of the Old Road, our particular concern is that any associated works may impact on the embankment, which we contend supports the Old Road. And it should be noted that part of that slipped in the past, so there's slippage off it at the entrance from St Mary's Road to the applicant's site. The bit above that has actually suffered slippage, and so we're concerned that might happen further in should they develop towards the bank. So on that particular point, we're not asking the committee to refuse the objection of that because of that. We're just saying that we would hope that we would be able to ensure that there are specific conditions to prevent damage to the Old Road, which is a right of access for us and our neighbours, and is actually on all our title deeds, including the applicant's title deeds. So we're just therefore requesting that the committee, should it be minded to approve the application, consider a condition expressly protecting the old road as part of the historic curtilage of a group of listed houses with a statement of special interest. And if I could just close by a couple of comments on the general comments on the process, I would endorse what Alistair was saying. It's a shame that the process didn't call for a pre-application consultation with the community. As it's a conservation area, I would have thought that would have been a reasonable starting point, and we feel some of the issues could have been ironed out with a consultation of that sort. And the second point I'd make is a more general one. Although Burnham is a conservation area, no conservation area appraisal has been carried out. Dunkeld has one, published in 2011, but there's not been an actual area appraisal for Burnham. I think if such an appraisal were carried out, and we'd be happy to participate in it, that would assist in any planning application, in considering any planning applications in this area in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Herberts. And are you willing to take questions from members?
Of course.
We'll give it a moment for members to put their questions in. Councillor Braun will take your first question.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I just wanted a bit of clarification. Thank you for your deputation. You talk about the old road. Is this road still used for vehicle traffic, or is it just a pedestrian road? You refer to it many times as the old road. I wonder if you just clarify that for me.
It's referred to on maps as the old road. As I mentioned, I think it was probably built in the 1850s. It's where we contend it is. It's about 2 meters wide. It has stones underneath it, which indicates it probably was used for carts and horses in the past. And you could surmise that it would have been used to build Torwood House and Duneard House, that materials would have been brought up it. It's not currently in use, though I would say that it's used as a right of access. There's a house to the right of, above the site, and to the left of Duneard House, there's a house called Old Pines, which was formerly part of the Duneard House curtilage, and that was built, I think, in about the 1980s. And the person who built that used the old road as access to the services, which are actually on Duneard House land. And so it's used by neighbours, and Torwood House also connects right down through that road. I mean, the road's still there, right up to the driveway of Torwood House over St Mary's Road. So it's still there, and it's still a right of access on our title deeds. And there is a gate at both ends on Duneard House land that we would contend. There's a gate in the fence at both ends to allow neighbours to come in. So the applicant would come through that gate. On our right, Old Pines would come through that gate to access that road for services and maintenance of services.
But just to clarify, there's no vehicular traffic on it.
Beg your pardon. No, you could drive the vehicle down, I guess, from the top of St Mary's Road down, but you would come to the slippage at the end, and you would not be able to progress further.
Fine, thank you.
Councillor Braun, would you like to ask your second question?
Thanks, Vice Convener. I was just to ask a question to ask Mr. Wiley, which was, do you consider that in this day and age, house designs have to change? I mean, the houses that were built around this site, when they were probably built to the modern design and standards of that time. Things have changed now in the 21st century. I mean, do you accept really and truly, as you said, something's got to be done with the site because it looks a mess in the photographs. Do you have to? Should we not accept that modern designs are very different to the ones that were used when you built the houses around it? So it's very much the same question, Mr. Wiley, really.
Yes, I would fully accept that. I think we've tried to make Duneard House as eco-friendly as possible, but insulated as far as we can, and done everything we can with the building to make it more modern in its usage. But in terms of the design, no problems. It's the style and character, the look of the thing, and whether that's in keeping with the local area. I mean, there's an example across from Burnham Hotel where they're building a new house there, and they're using stone facing, which very much melds into the the local context, you could look at that house and not necessarily know it was built yesterday. It could have been built any time in the last 100 years, and I think the design as it is doesn't look or feel like any of the other houses around about. So there's a kind of style of the village which it's going against, and that's not anything to do with the modernity of it. It's just the look of it, really.
Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
Good morning. Thank you for your deputation. Appreciate that and the time you've taken to do that. I appreciate that there's an awful lot of thought and concern going into what you've said and what Mr. Wiley said. But in your deputation, you did actually mention that it's an area of natural beauty. And I'm quite assured that you agree with me that that site doesn't lend itself to what you'd like to see. Do you feel that the proposed development would not lend itself to an area of natural beauty?
I think in another place, I'm not saying anything about the aesthetics of the building. I'm not an expert in that, and I'm sure my wife would say that she was better qualified than I was to answer that question. But it's more about being in keeping in character with the other buildings round about it. I'm not saying it's an ugly building or an ugly design. I'm saying that I don't think it's in keeping with any of the other buildings around it. It looks different from them all. You can be different and still beautiful. But if you're coming to a Victorian village with the Beatrix Potter experience, you've got Eastwood House opposite, you've got all the kind of those buildings, to see something that's very out of keeping jars a little bit, and I think it detracts a bit from the tourist experience, the visitor experience to the area.
Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. You mentioned about the house Old Pines in your deputation. What type of construction is that property? Is it of a Victorian construction or is it more modern?
Thank you. It's more modern, but it's not out of keeping with the other buildings in the area, really. It doesn't look out of character with the rest of the buildings in the area.
So Herbertson, there doesn't appear to be any further questions. Thank you. Do we have Ms. Nisbet on the phone line?
Hello, councillors. Can you hear me okay now?
Good morning, Ms. Nisbet. Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Apologies for that. I seem to have some technical difficulties getting unmuted there.
Okay, that's fine. That's part of the modern age. My name's Councillor Stewart. I'm the Vice Convener. Are you aware that you've got 10 minutes for your deputation?
Yes. Yes, I do.
And I will give you a prompt after 9 minutes for you to have a minute to summarise. So when you're ready for your deputation, Ms. Nisbet, I will start the clock.
Okay.
If you'd like to proceed in.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to thank the previous two speakers for raising their concerns over the project, and I'd just like to go over some of those points and then take questions on those. So the proposed house has been designed carefully to fit this site. It's a complicated site and obviously in a conservation area, but also a woodland site as well, and that's been taken into consideration. The house has been designed as a number of smaller buildings and smaller volumes to fit the existing topography of the site and to reduce visibility and massing of the structure. We note that the concerns over overlooking between the proposed house and the neighbouring properties, and we have submitted detailed diagrams showing the overlooking or the strategy to reduce overlooking from the building onto the neighbouring properties. So on the first floor buildings, they are 4.5 metre boundary, and those windows that have been placed on that part of the building, they are either low level or high level so that they're above and below eye level, so to reduce any overlooking between the one-storey area of the building and the neighbouring properties. The two-storey section of the building, the two-storey windows that are on the south elevation are actually 12 metres away from the boundary wall. So we feel that there should not be an overlooking issue between the upper storey glazing and the neighbouring properties. I believe there's the discussion about the road that runs to the north of the site, the historic route that runs through the site. I believe this is really quite overgrown in places, and there is one area that has collapsed. But what I think is more important on this is that the house and the development is not within that area and should not cause any harm or remove that route through the site. And so I think I'd just like to take some questions from the councillors and committee members on the points that have been raised and any points of concern that we can address directly with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms Nisbet. We'll give it a moment for members to populate the chat box. Bailey Williamson.
Thank you, Vice Convener. There was a question raised earlier in one of the deputations round about the working hours of the construction, and I was wondering if the agent would be minded to review those working hours as requested.
Yeah, working hours, as we know, are normally governed by environmental health, but we would certainly be happy to discuss those and review them.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vice Convener. It was just to emphasise the point again that Mr Wiley brought up, Ms Nisbet. The windows on the first floor of this building are they overlooking their property, or are they kind of overlooking another area? I didn't quite understand your comment there about where they were overlooking and where they were not overlooking. Thanks, if you could clarify, thanks.
So the windows on the south elevation on the two-storey section are directly behind Mr Wiley's property, and from the face of the window to the boundary wall between our site and Mr Wiley's is 12 metres. And then it's onto the rear of Mr Wiley's house. So okay, I believe.
Sorry, go on.
No, sorry, you go on. I interrupted you.
No. I was just about to clear. Yeah. So it's basically clarify what you said. So, but from that window on the first floor, it overlooks this property 12 metres distance. Is that correct?
It's actually further than 12 metres. It's 12 metres to the boundary, and then there's the boundary wall onto Mr Wiley's rear of his property.
Which looks on the Google Maps about another 3 or 4 metres, so about 15 metres then altogether.
Yeah,
you would say. Right. Okay. Right. Thanks very much.
Ms Nisbet, there appears to be no further questions. Thank you for your time.
Okay. No, thank you.
There's no further deputations. Conveners, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Can I ask members if they have any questions for officers? Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. Yeah, there was just in both deputations there was concern about need for public consultation. just for clarity, could the officers confirm that this was not required because it's not seen to be a large application? Thank you.
Yeah, the applications for a single house, in order for there to be a statutory requirement for local public consultation, there would require to be in excess of 49 houses. So it would be 50 and more houses before there would be a statutory requirement for public consultation. I think maybe what could have happened is that the engagement between neighbours and the architect or property owners, but that would be for them to organise and undertake.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, convener. It was just to kind of clarify, there's obviously a bit of disagreement about over the windows overlooking the house and the distance it should, the separation distance it should be. I've also got a related question which I'll come back to if you allow me later on. But what's the officer's view on the comments that the windows on the first floor overlooking the house? Is that something that's within the bounds of acceptability as far as the I've forgotten the name now, as far as the kind of planning applications and regulations are concerned? I'd just like their comment on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Yes, in short, we are satisfied with the distance that is provided to the boundary. The placemaking supplementary guidance that we have states that in relation to overlooking windows of habitable rooms should generally be a minimum of 9 metres from rear boundaries where they overlook. And then obviously in this instance, as we've just heard, the distance to the boundary is between 12 and 13. So it is a good bit in excess of that distance. In addition to that, we do also take into account the existing trees, boundary walls, etc., that are adjacent as well, and also the windows of adjacent and adjoining property. And obviously we've heard in this instance that they are not habitable rooms in the property beyond at Birchwood Cottage, but ultimately we are satisfied.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll come back maybe later on if nobody else asks my second question. Convener, thanks.
Councillor Braun.
Thanks, Convener. A question for Mr. Williamson, but it may want to pass this on to somebody from flooding. I'm looking at paragraph 65 of the report, and it says that the site is not identified by SEPA as being vulnerable to surface water. Now, looking at the photographs, there is this potential property sits at the bottom of a very steep hill, and I'm just wondering, given weather patterns we are, I mean, how up to date is SEPA's information regarding this? Because we know we're in the middle of heavy rain now. I mean, is this a site going to be vulnerable to water coming down that hill into this house potentially, and then on to other houses? So my question really is, how up to date is the information from SEPA, given the changes in weather patterns that we're seeing? And are we sure really that this is going to be not going to be a problem? As I say, you might want to pass this on to somebody else. I don't know.
Thank you, Councillor Braun. I think you're breaking up your question into various composite parts there. SEPA has published very recently updated flood mapping that accounts for additional climate change parameters associated to MPF4, so there is very recent updating of SEPA's mapping. But other than that, the advice that's given from SEPA is their standard advice based on that information. So they are not objecting, they are satisfied with that, and we've looked at it and we don't consider that there's an issue that cannot be mitigated through our regular drainage arrangements.
Thanks, Mr. Smith. Thank you, Convener.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Convener. I think I want to ask roughly the same question, but in a different way, especially relating to the heritage of the track on the embankment. Now, the embankment, as has been mentioned a few times, there's been a landslip, which gives the idea that there is water running off it that can cause that. And also, I'm sure I read somewhere in the planning application, the previous chalets had a sump that pumped the water off the site, which again indicates that there's potentially some issues with water historically on the site, that they were actually pumping it off. And I know there was porosity tests for soakaways and stuff like that, but it's just, you know, some reassurance that there isn't going to be, you know, changing from. And I assume this sump pump thing is going to be not get used anymore is an assumption I'm making here, but correct me if I'm wrong, please. But just that, you know, when you have an embankment, you do have water runs down it with the slippage proofs. So I just want some reassurance that there isn't going to be some flooding issues caused by the change in the way that the water on the site is currently being will be managed as part of this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Yeah, certainly from the perspective of the actual built form of the development, it is taking almost entirely the lower section of the site. So the intrusion into the existing embankment is restricted really to a retaining feature of about 1 metre in height. So it's not particularly significant in terms of the works there. Otherwise, the applicant obviously does have to go through the hoops in respect of sustainable urban drainage, in respect of through ourselves and also building standards. So they will have to take that into account.
So that gets picked up at a different part of the process, and from the heritage perspective with the path, which I assume is not within the red boundary that sits on that slope, does that come into this planning, or is that separate?
Just to cover that the actual old road does sit within the red line boundary of the site, but there are no works in the vicinity of the old road at all, so it would be untouched. And unless there was something that constituted development, then it might necessitate another application. But as it stands, there's no works in that area.
And given the unintended consequences type thing, is there potential to put in, like and one of the deputies this morning mentioned that some suspensive type condition to help protect that heritage?
Maybe just reiterate that there's nothing proposed that would indicate any impact on that road at all. So we would be putting on a condition that perhaps wouldn't pass the test because it's not necessary, because there's nothing proposed that would have any impact on it. So we don't feel that it's necessary to put any condition on in respect of the old road because there's nothing in the vicinity of it which would have any impact. I think there's also a comment that's been submitted from an engineer, again talking about the retaining wall, and again that would not have any impact. So we don't feel that there's a necessity for a condition.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, it's to do with condition 8. I'm wondering, is there a reason why it's been set for 11 p.m. till 7 a.m. and would it be easy to change that to 9 p.m. rather than 11 p.m.?
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. The reason behind it is the widely used model condition that we use in conjunction with environmental health, largely in relation to the likes of air source heat pumps, etc. So it's very much the one that we utilise across the board for many new developments in Perth and Kinross, but I'm not sure whether Lynn Reid would want to comment further upon that.
Yes, Councillor Cuthbert. The time sets are for nighttime and daytime periods. So the level that any plant noise should make within those daytime and nighttime periods has to be within the NR curve set. And these daytime and nighttime periods are set by WHO. So the daytime period is from 7 o'clock to 2300 hours, and then the night time period is 2300 hours to 7 o'clock. So they can't really be changed because that's the set nighttime and daytime periods recognised by the WHO authority. Hope that answers your question.
Maybe just to clarify there, that the condition actually does cover 24 hours a day and meets with the standards set by the World Health Organization.
Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Convener. Paragraph 25 says that the proposal would not have harmful impacts on Dunaird House or the conservation area. What's the thinking behind that?
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. Obviously, each site is taken on a individual case-by-case basis. We look closely upon the factors such as the built form of development, landscape cover, topography. In this instance, the site is located, a short distance off St Mary's Road, down an existing access track. It's located behind Robertson Court, Birchwood Cottage. It's also set significantly beneath the listed building above, and on that basis, the visibility of the site itself is relatively limited. It's certainly not at the forefront of public view, and on that basis, because it sits within the back, within a relatively mature landscape setting, then we are satisfied that it doesn't have associated impacts on either the listed building or conservation area more widely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bailey Williamson.
Thank you, Convener. My question is about the landscaping plan and looking at the new native hedgerow. I'm just wondering if there's scope within that to adjust the species and type of hedging that's going in there to try and create greater privacy, and or possibly using semi-mature hedging plants.
Thank you very much, Bailey Williamson. Certainly from our perspective, we are satisfied with what's been tabled so far on the basis of what's there existing, the relationship to existing property. We are quite satisfied, but should members be so minded that they would, seek an amendment to it, then we could put in an alternative condition on that basis for an alternative scheme of landscaping to be submitted for our consideration. But as it stands, we don't think it's necessary.
Just to add to that, I think maybe in terms of the landscaping plan, it's there to soften the appearance of the development, to have some landscaping along boundaries and things, but we don't consider that the landscaping is part of the privacy aspects of it. It's not there to provide privacy. The separation distances and arrangements associated to the design and layout, architecture and arrangement with existing buildings is satisfactory. So the landscaping is simply there as a landscaping feature rather than a means of creating privacy.
So in that respect, then it's the neighbours wouldn't get greater privacy if. Could the neighbours get greater privacy if the landscaping plan was changed? Whilst I understand what you said, Christian, if the landscaping plan was changed so that they would get greater privacy, is that a consideration you could put forward?
Yeah, I think it would be undoubted that if there is a large barrier between one property and another, then you cannot see through. But the separation distances that there are in the arrangement between buildings without that landscaping is acceptable to us.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, I'd just like the officer's comment. There was a few comments on the kind of nature of the buildings and how it might be out of character with the rest of the buildings there. What's the officer's feeling on some of those comments? Obviously, you think it's all right. I'm interested in your perspective. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Yes, as you allude, we did receive comments in respect of whether or not the design was appropriate. As I just outlined to Councillor Illingworth as well, we do take each site on its own merits. In the vicinity of this application site, yes, we do have our more traditional properties with Dulnane House, Birchwood Cottage, etc. Torwood. We also have more modern development such as Kirkbrae, Robertson Court, relatively modern suburban houses. So there is actually a mix of development types. Because of the relatively elongated nature of this site, it calls for architecture that's a bit different, and hence why such an approach has been taken by the agent in this instance to work with the land available to them. So it's a very novel solution to this site that we're happy with.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no further questions. Give it a second. No further questions. Can I ask for a motion? Councillor Illingworth.
Yep, my motion would be to accept the proposal. Thank you.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Allen.
Given my understanding of all that's been said today, I'm happy to second the proposal.
Thank you. Do we have any amendment? Bailey Williamson.
My amendment is to accept the development as it is, but just reconsider the type of planting at the edges of the property and see if there's an opportunity there to try and create some additional privacy with different types of planting rather than a screen. So it would be a native hedge of some sort, but just refresh that planting plan.
Councillor Waters, you're going to second?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, convener. I'm happy to second that amendment, and just to see if there's some scope to enhance the privacy of the houses that are already there with a resubmitted landscape plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Illingworth, can I ask you if you're prepared to accept the amendment within your motion?
Can I just ask the officers again why they think this might not be necessary?
Apologies, my phone rang through there. Can I ask you to repeat the question, please?
I'll maybe take it. And I think I maybe covered it earlier as well. It meets with our standards, the standards as set out within the statutory, the supplementary guidance, the separation distances, the angles, the windows that are within the adjoining property are not servicing habitable rooms. So it meets with our standards. Therefore, there is no requirement to create a more significant barrier in terms of the supplementary guidance.
Okay, I'm going to ask.
Can I ask again, what do you think the impact would be if we accepted the amendment?
We'd have to see what could be done within the limited space available to create something more substantive. Again, something more substantive may have unintended consequences, but I couldn't say what the scenario would be without seeing details associated to it. But it may well be difficult to have something significant.
Yeah. Just a second. Councillor Illingworth, I'm going to ask Mr. Elliott to summarise what the change will mean.
Thank you, Convener. I think, first of all, you've moved, directing my comments to Councillor Illingworth and Councillor Allen, you've moved the report. So what that does, and I'm looking at condition 9, that's accepting the existing landscaping and planting scheme. Now, the amendment by Councillor Bailey Williamson and Councillor Waters, the way I've understood it is that condition 9 would have to be changed so that it would have to be, you wouldn't be approving the existing landscaping and planting scheme, you would be looking for a new one to come in subject to approval of the planning authority. Now, we don't have that, so you don't know what that's going to be, as Mr. Smith has said. So that's still, obviously, officers would take your views into account and look to see changes to that landscaping scheme, but it would still be subject to future approval. So I think what we're looking at the moment is whether Councillors Illingworth and Allen are prepared to accept that change. So you wouldn't be approving a landscaping scheme, you'd be looking for a new one.
Bailey Williamson.
I think what my request is, or my ask is whilst I accept the planting plan as it is for the hedging scheme, it seems to be dominated by things like blackthorn, hawthorn, and wild roses, and I think it's just a change of species to basically just to see if there's something else that would create a little bit more privacy. So I accept the planting plan as it is. It's just those 3 species are just to look at those 3 species and see if there's something else that could be planted within there that may or may not give greater privacy. So it's just a species thing rather than the actual overall planting plan.
Certainly in response to that, it would still, because of the limitations of the condition as it stands, any amendment to it to supplement any planting further would require a whole new condition. So, you know, it's just as Mr. Elliott has pointed out.
It's maybe, sorry, Bailey Williamson, it's maybe trying to, is your concern that those species which have been looked at by our internal parties in terms of biodiversity and appropriateness in terms of local species, is it that you could see through those species, or are you looking for something of considerably larger height?
Yeah, it's that you can basically see through those species. I'm not asking for a fence per se. It's just other, you know, as I say, there are different percentages of hawthorn, blackthorn, and wild rose which make up 60% of the planting. It's just, is there something else there? Basically, we're replacing the existing leylandii hedge with this. You can't see through the leylandii hedge, and it's just something that would offer more appropriate screening. So it's not about throwing the entire landscaping plan out the way. It's just those 3 species, and is there something else that could be slotted into its place?
I'm sure we could, and I'm sure that the applicant's agent is listening today, and they would have the option to update the landscaping plan if they so wished, and we could look at that. But in order to get a condition, we could revise the condition and look at alternative species. But our advice is that it's an acceptable mix, it's an appropriate mix given the situation, and you know, there's not a privacy issue in terms of our guidance and our view.
Councillor Illingworth, after hearing all that, will you accept the amendment within your motion?
I'm happy to go with the motion as it currently stands. I appreciate Bailey Williamson's concerns, but I think it does fall within the existing standards.
I think from my perspective, it's just a privacy issue, and is there additional species that could be slotted in there that could create additional privacy? Nothing more.
Councillor Illingworth. Yeah, of course. Is there any other amendments? Nothing. Councillor Illingworth, do you want to sum up?
I'm content with what I've heard from the officers, and I'm content that all the planning processes have been followed.
Bailey Williamson, want to sum up?
Yeah, as I've mentioned previously, I'm not looking for wholesale changes to the landscaping plan. I am just a bit unnerved by the fact that 60% of the hedging plants, or 60% of the hedging is possibly not going to provide sufficient privacy to the neighbouring properties. I understand what officers have said. I'm just requesting that, is there alternative species that could be dropped in there that would provide just that additional privacy? That's all.
Thank you, Convener. Before members vote,
just to remind you that the motion by Councillor Illingworth, seconded by Councillor Allen, is to grant per the report, which means approving the existing landscaping planting scheme. The amendment by Councillor Bailey Williamson, seconded by Councillor Waters, is still to grant, but you would need an amended condition 9. You're not approving a landscaping plan, you're requiring a new one to be submitted and approved by the planning authority later on.
Thank you. Members, when I call your name, please let me know if you're voting for the motion or the amendment. Councillor Allen.
Motion.
Councillor Braun.
Amendment.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Amendment.
Councillor Harvey.
Motion.
Councillor Illingworth.
Motion.
Councillor James.
Motion.
Councillor Leishman. Councillor Leishman.
Motion.
Councillor Massey. Bailey McLaren.
Motion.
Councillor Stewart.
Amendment.
Councillor Waters.
Amendment.
Bailey Williamson.
Amendment.
Thank you. I have 6 votes for the motion and 6 for the amendment. Convener, you have the casting vote.
I'll stick with what I said, the amendment.
Thank you. Therefore, the amendment will carry.
We have a 5-minute recess. Is it okay? Everyone okay with that? Yep. Right, now we move on. This is the final application of the day, and it's for the erection of 16 dwelling houses, 3 with detached garages, 1 with a detached garage, ancillary accommodation, formation of 6 plots for affordable dwelling houses, formation of suds, pond, landscape and associated works at land 100 metres southeast of Cragton Villa, Rost Garden, Scotland Well. To introduce the report is Mr. Williamson. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. The final local application on the agenda relates to this site in Scotland Well, which is allocated for residential development as site H54 as a 1.7 hectare site for between 21 and 32 homes. The application site is presently an uncultivated field bound by the causeway to the west, Friar Place to the north. To the east and south are agricultural fields. The application is for the erection of 16 detached dwellings ranging in size, together with 6 self-built plots as an affordable housing mechanism. The application has been referred to the Planning and Placemaking Committee today, as it was in receipt of 15 letters of objection, including 1 from the Portmoak Community Council. Next slide, please. First, we see an aerial extract of the site showing the location in relation to the wider settlement of Scotland Well. The site is located at the southern extremity, adjacent to other more modern developments, including Friar Place to the north and also Wellside Park to the west. The more historic core of Scotland Well and the associated conservation area are located beyond to the north. Next slide, please. Next, we see a more detailed location plan showing the aforementioned existing developments within the settlement. It also shows the causeway to the western boundary and a drainage ditch that flows along the southern boundary. Next slide, please. The next drawing is the site plan, which shows the arrangement of development on site. This shows the provision of 2 access points from the causeway, with 1 to the north near the existing field access and 1 further to the south. The layout also provides a retained field access through to the east, as well as the provision of a suds pond and foul water pumping station at the southeast corner. An area of public open space is also provided to the centre of the site. Members will note that the provision of the 6 self-built plots to the western edge. These would require to be the subject of separate applications for planning permission, but would ultimately be controlled through the agreement of a design code and plot passport as part of the recommended conditions. Next slide, please. We now have our first sectional view of the development. The top drawing shows the view from Friar Place, with a two-storey dwelling on the left and the two bungalows in the centre. The self-built plots would be on the right-hand side towards the causeway. The bottom section is from further down the site and cuts through the Suds Pond and the last four dwellings at the southern edge of the site. Next slide, please. This second sectional view shows the comparison between the detached dwellings beside Friar Place on the left, leading to one of the bungalows, then the scale stepping up as it extends down the site to the south. It also illustrates the change in level down to the adjacent ditch, into which the outflow from the Suds Pond would fall through a controlled valve. Next slide, please. Next, we have an indication of the proposed elevations of a couple of the house types. Materials would be modern and would include the use of off-white render and buff-facing brick, with green-painted timber cladding, windows and doors. Roofs would include a mix of natural slate and red pantiles. Next slide, please. This plan shows the proposed drainage layout. All properties would be connected to the public water supply and foul drainage would be pumped to the public wastewater network. Surface water would be collected in the Suds Pond at the southeast corner of the site with an outflow to the adjacent ditch. I will now take members through a series of photographs taken recently by myself. Next slide, please. The first photograph is taken from the southwest corner of the site and shows the mature hedging which runs along the boundary with the causeway. Whilst initially it was considered to put a footpath along the road, it was considered more appropriate to retain this mature biodiversity feature and route appropriate footpaths within the site itself. The photo also shows the dwellings of Friar Place beyond the field and the rising topography of Munduff Hill beyond. Next slide, please. The next photograph was taken from the same position at the southwest corner, with this one looking further east. The photo gives an indication as to the lower level and the uncultivated nature of the site. Next slide, please. This next photo was taken from the southeast corner of the site, close to where the outflow from the Suds Pond would be directed. Next slide, please. Next, we see the existing field access from the causeway towards the north of the site, adjacent to the dwelling Cragton Villa. This also shows the existing landscape boundary formed at the eastern edge of the allocated site. Next slide, please. Also taken from the same position, this is the view southwards along the causeway, which ultimately passes Portmoak Airfield and leads to Ballingry. Next slide, please. The next photo is from close to the point of the southern access into the site, which shows the B920 causeway leading back into Scotland Well. Next slide, please. We now move on to a final set of photos giving a flavour of the design and appearance of the nearest properties to the site, including Wellside Park on the top left and Cragton Villa at the bottom. Next image, please. Thank you, convener. That now concludes my presentation. I will leave members with the proposed site plan for reference.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. I'll now hand over to the Vice Convener for your deputations procedure. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Can I call on Mr. Morris, who is from the Portmoak Community Council and objector to the application. Mr. Morris, I'm aware that you have got an issue with your voice and you have 10 minutes for your deputation, and I will, if you require to stop and clear your voice, etc., I'll stop the clock. So whenever you feel that you're ready, I'll start the clock and I'll give you a prompt after 9 minutes.
Much for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. I am Vice Chair of Portmoak Community Council and want to explain why we believe you should reject this planning application. Doing so, I must emphasise that the Community Council accepts the principle that housing development should take place on this site, as consistent with its zoning in H54 of the local development plan. But any development of this site will be very significant for the relatively small settlement of Scotland Well, with 120 houses in the present village The proposed increase of 22 houses represents an expansion of nearly 20% in residential property, and an even greater increase in population size, with most of the proposed houses being family-sized properties with 4 bedrooms. Any planning approval needs to take account of the needs of new residents, especially children, and the current problems in Scotland Well, including those related to the provision of a safe route to school, active travel, and access to green space. Unfortunately, the proposals before you today fail to meet the community's aspirations, and at the very least do not comply with the policy requirements of the local development plan or national policy, in our opinion. If approved, the proposed development would have a number of significant negative impacts which can be grouped under 4 headings. 1. Site development. This site was first zoned for housing development many years ago and has featured in previous LDPs. During this time, we know that major house building companies and housing associations have examined the site, but none have progressed to seek planning approval. I understand that this is primarily due to the known presence of some very challenging ground conditions within the site, resulting from alternating bands of sand and peat, which would require substantial digging and extraction, and in all likelihood extending below the water table. These problems became evident during the construction of housing on the lower part of the adjacent fireplace, which is located immediately to the north side of H54, and also for the more recent Wellside Park development directly northwest. Some of these developments required peat extraction down to a depth of 4 meters. We do not accept that a sufficiently thorough ground investigation work has been carried out by the developer on H54. We are concerned that the developer may have significantly underestimated the complexity of ground conditions. There is a fundamental need to get a much more detailed evaluation of exactly where and at what depth the bands of peat extend to within the site, and how these can be dealt with during any construction work. The sampling carried out on the site by Geovia using machine dug trial pits only goes down to depths between 1 and 2.1 meters. This is too shallow to ascertain the potential impact of peat deposits on construction efforts. This shallow sampling has simply exposed peaty soils developed through 150 years of agricultural tilling, but this sampling has not penetrated into the peat deposits that are known to be historically a part of Portmouth Moss, and which caused the difficulties at the nearby fireplace and Wellside developments. If you look at the peat survey report, the 23rd of 9th, 21, and Appendix 2 is a report from Scott Bennett, engineering consultants, written in October 2011. And they say, as regards the site investigation, as geotechnical properties of the underlying sand have not yet been able to be obtained, in this respect, the drilling of several boreholes across the site is recommended to investigate the sand stratum and materials below, and to determine whether any peat materials are present at greater depth within the sand stratum. They also recommend the setting up of post-drilling monitoring wells to check on the groundwater situation and whether there is any concentration of methane and CO2. As far as I know, that investigation has not yet been carried out. So we do not understand why SEPA have not insisted that deeper sampling should have been carried out, and why they have drawn their objection. without appropriate scrutiny. Meanwhile, the Community Council believes that it is essential that for any housing development on this site, an all-risk reparation bond has to be put in place by the developer and should be part of any planning approval. Such a bond will enable the site to be restored as far as practical in the event of the developer failing to complete any approved development. Second major issue concerns affordable housing. This is a very contentious issue, and I have raised the problems associated with PKC's current affordable policy in meetings of the Kinross Shire Committee. The way in which this policy is failing to meet affordable housing requirements within the Portmoat Community Council area. We have repeatedly made it clear to officers that we are absolutely opposed to the proposal that, within age 54, the affordable housing requirement should be met by the provision of self-build plots. It is houses that people need, not building plots. It is impractical for the people in Portmoat who need affordable housing to engage in a long process of securing planning approval, financial support, and then commissioning and supervising the construction process that self-build requires. I understand that it is within the powers of this committee to determine how the affordable housing requirement is to be met. We strongly urge you to reject this element of the planning application and to ask the officers to consider other more sensible and acceptable options as contained within the overall affordable housing policy. Third point, landscape impact. We have considerable concern about the size of the majority of houses proposed for age 54. While we accept that these could be up to 1.5 stories in height, we feel that a significant number of the proposed houses should be of a lower roof height than what is proposed. Otherwise, there would be a significant degradation in the view of Scotland Well when approaching from the house, bearing in mind that the roof level of the majority of these houses is in excess of 8 metres. The Wellside development on the opposite side of the road to H54 already demonstrates that placing large tall houses on the periphery of the village can have a detrimental effect on the appearance of Scotland Well from the south. This settlement consists primarily of houses of more modest size, including those within the Scotland Well conservation area, as well as more modern developments. A revised planning application is needed, which is more sympathetic to the need for more diversity in the roof heights and reflects the description of Scotland Well in the Jehovah report as a village dominated by detached bungalows and relatively large garden areas. And finally, on active travel, we agree that the development of H54 should only proceed if accompanied by significant community benefit, but we disagree with the proposed benefits. For many years, the residents of Scotland Well have complained about the lack of paths providing direct connection to nearby communities. People say they are marooned in Scotland Well, depending on their own village to get to neighbouring communities and main roads out of Scotland Well. This means we want the community benefit to be spent on building a path from Scotland Well towards Kinneswood and making a final connection there. To conclude, I'll simply say that we view this development as not complying with NPF 4 Policy 13, and as regards the LDP, not complying with policies 60B, 14B, and 39. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Morse. Are you willing to take questions from members? And we'll give it a moment for the teams to be populated. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Thank you very much for your presentation there. I just wanted to just get a wee bit more detail on the first point of objection that you had relating to this kind of soil types and the peat and that type of thing. Could you kind of clarify what your concern is, that you think site is more liable to flooding, for example, than other sites? Was that what your point was? If you could clarify, thanks very much.
Oh, as regards flooding, we accept SEPA's study into that, and they seem to be fairly satisfied. The big issue is that, as we know from the other previous developments, there is a risk of a really big hole having to be dug in the site below 2 meters to get down to other peaty layers, which may be at greater depth than 2 meters. And so it's the reality, of course, as I've said, that if the development was to prove to be economically unsound and half built, we could be left with a great big hole and a lot of debris to deal with. And so it's just the physical removal of all the peat that's the problem.
Okay, that's fine, thanks. It's more to do with the building risk and the commercial risk than flooding, right? Okay, that's clear. Thanks very much for your clarification.
Mr. Morris, there appears to be no further questions. Thank you for your time. A call on Mr. Timmins, agent for the application.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Oh,
Hello.
sorry. Good morning, Mr. Timmins. It's Grant Stewart, the Vice Convener. You have 10 minutes to make your deputation. I'll give you a prompt after 9 minutes. So when you're ready, just please start.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, committee. It's just to say we're the architects, 56 architects, and within the site we have not maximised the number of houses on the site, although it's allocated for between 22 and 30 odds. So we're quite low in numbers. Also, we've had several reports with regard to peat and flooding, and through SEPA, who objected originally, they're now satisfied that there is no peat. It's a peaty soil. It's about 40% organic material and not peat. And also the flooding doesn't occur on the site, which we've reported on. With regard to landscaping and the position of the houses, I think they're fairly quite far apart or spaced apart, detached houses with different types of houses, styles of houses, and with the affordable housing to the left, which is the custom build. This is something that was promoted from Perth and Ross Council rather than built houses for rent or for sale as affordable. Perth and Ross Council would like to do this as people building their own houses, and those people would come from the local area to build the houses for themselves within the area. I think that's all I've got to say at the moment on that, and I can take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Timmins. We'll give it a moment. Councillor Waters.
Thank you for your deputation there. Just a question on the peaty type soil or the depth of it. Have you drilled boreholes deeper down to check the suitability of the substructure, the subsoil to determine its suitability? And are you confident that there won't be any problems? I know there's a lot of concern within the community over over the suitability of the land for building. And can you just give a response to that,
Well,
please?
Yeah, I can only very briefly. I'm not an expert on the soils. Geovia themselves, who are the consultants to perform the SI report, they dug down, I think it's 2.4, maybe just slightly more than 2.4 meters, and it was going into a sort of grey sandy material. So they were the experts, and they got the soil tested, and it turned out it wasn't peat, it was about 40% organic material. I think it's because over the last 150, 60 years, that land has been drained, so peat no longer exists in that area. I think that's where it comes from. With regard to construction, yes, we know it will be challenging, but there are ways and means that structural engineers can come up with the structures to set the houses on that's down at lower depths. Does that answer?
Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Thanks, Mr. Timmins, for your presentation there. You might have heard a couple of questions that one of the commenters had in relation to both the kind of social housing requirements and the height of the houses themselves. Do you have any comments to make just generally to that?
Well, the style of the houses are first floors are room and roofs, so the 1.5 story houses. If there were 2-story houses, the roofs would be a lot higher. The roof ridge heights do vary on the site, and obviously there's a natural fall off the site from northwest to southeast. So not all the roofs will be at exactly 8 meters high. It will vary as the site goes down, and we have introduced bungalows to the north of the site, and also the affordable housing. We would the developer would give a code and material use, and it's down to individually these people, whoever buys these plots, to design their own house, which would be separate planning applications, nothing to do with the developer at this stage. And people could decide on what style of the house they want, but keeping within the material palette that to try and tie in with the rest of the 16 houses that's proposed.
Okay, thanks very much.
Also, just to say that the houses themselves would be SIP panel construction, which is super efficient. So we're trying to do a modern construction to make them more energy efficient as well, and that would be the same for the affordable. They would have to achieve the same standards.
Okay, no, thanks very much, Mr. Timmins.
Thank you.
Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Convener. Mr. Timmins, are you aware of any other houses in Scotland that have either got 1.5 stories or 2 stories?
There are several across the directly sort of northwest is the newer development, and they're 2-story to 1.5 to 2-story, or probably 1 3/4 heights. And generally, there are some houses on the main Leslie Road which are higher as well, 2 stories, but they're probably older constructions. Directly to the north is a lot more of our site. There's bungalows, quite wide bungalows, and therefore they have lots of roof space on them. So there is a mix. There is quite a mix of house types and house styles within Scotland Well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I'm going back to the affordable housing again. I'm just curious. It's quite an unusual thing for somebody looking for an affordable house to be looking to build their own house, so to speak. So I'm just wondering how these are going to be marketed and what sort of price bracket you think they'll be in.
Well, I'm sorry, I can't answer that. It would have to be the Persican Ross affordable housing team who would be involved in this, and that's a chap called Campbell Hall. I don't know if you know of him. I don't know if he's going to be speaking today at this meeting, but he would be the best chap to speak to it about it. We're given over that side of the land, or the developer is given over that side of the land for possible 6 plots. I think we have to provide 5.5 houses or affordable housing, but we're given 6 plots or areas for 6 plots on the western side of the site. So I think Campbell Hall, as I say, would be the best person to speak to on that.
There's no further questions, Mr. Timmins, so you're free to go. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Committee. Bye.
There's no further deputations. I'll hand back to you, convener.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Can I ask members if they have any questions for officers? And I will actually start it off because I've already thought about questions for Mr. Hall, who's kindly come along to the committee, who's the Affordable Housing Enabler in Perth and Kinross. So I would actually like to ask him the question about the 6 custom built plots. How do they work? I've never seen this before. Yeah.
Morning, convener. Morning, councillors. Thank you. It works. It's a much more common tenure in Germany, the Netherlands, Scandinavia. It's also quite common in England, where we're much further down. Where England is much further down the line in terms of having right to build legislation. We do have provision, I think, as is covered in the report, in terms of national policy and indeed our affordable housing supplementary guidance, which identifies affordable self-built plots as an option for affordable. How that would work in practice, convener, is in relation to this particular scheme, we would look to acquire the plots from the developer by means of a negotiated open book tender, very similar to what we would do if we were getting into a partnership with a house builder to deliver built affordable houses built to the councils or a housing association specification under a Section 75 agreement. The difference here is that the developer is not providing built houses. We're not entering into a contract. They would be entering into a contract to provide service plots to our specification. Is that better? Can everyone? Yeah, that's much better. Jolly good. We would be looking at a target cost per plot, which is based on a sort of national average of between about £30,000 and £40,000 per plot. Once we acquire the plots as a council, we would market these via, initially, we have a self-built register, which all local authorities are required to have in place as part of the Planning Act, the 2019 Planning Act. We have established that register. We haven't launched it yet, so we've not publicised it, but of a chicken and egg situation because we have nothing to publicise on it. In terms of who we would market it to, there's a number of criteria that we would look at in terms of priorities. We'd be looking at targeting first-time buyers, downsizers. That's people who live in housing that's unsuitable for them, usually for reasons of access, people who are getting on in years a wee bit like myself, and people where they've maybe experienced significant change, as well as other categories like people with disabilities, ex-service personnel, current service personnel. In terms of local connection, we would prioritise people with a local connection, existing residents. So that might be existing residents from Scotland Well who would wish to downsize. It might be first-time buyers who are not getting an opportunity to get in the housing market because of the high property valuations in the area. Then we would come down a hierarchy of making that of priorities to make them available to people in Milnathorpe, Kinross, the Kinross housing market area, Perth and Kinross, and you get the picture. widen that out. But I'd be fairly confident that we would be able to satisfy any local demand there on the basis that these are discounted plot sales at roughly 40 to 50,000 pounds a plot, which is significantly lower than the average plot price in Perth and Kinross, which I don't have recent figures for that, but the last figures I had on that was, I think, somewhere upwards of 120 and 130,000, and that was pre-pandemic prices. So in terms of the financial priority, what we do with low cost home ownership, we would do something similar to here. For someone looking to buy a shared equity property that we've done successfully, we did one recently in Abernethy, we did one recently in Kinross. The one in typically for a shared equity property, we would be looking to prioritise people who had a median or mean household income, not a personal income, that would qualify as affordable, that would meet affordable criteria. The most recent figures I have for the Kinross housing market area is the average household income, the mean housing income. Household income is £53,000 per household. The median household income is £46,000 per household. Now that would work in terms of a mortgage assessment for a self-build or indeed any other mortgage, that 3 to 3.5 times that household income would give people the means by which to build their own house. Self-build housing tends to be, from figures that we have nationally, 20 to 30% cheaper than buying a house, although the counter to that is it's much cheaper to walk into a show house with from a well-known house builder. It's much more convenient at the minute, and that's what we're looking to address here. I think that answers all the points, convener, that in terms of how we would market them and how it would work, how the delivery would work.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. If you could just stay there just now, because I'm sure there's going to be a couple of questions for you. Councillor Ron, you've got 2 questions. Can I let you ask one just now?
Okay, fine, convener. You've actually pretty much asked one of them already, but if I can just follow that through a little bit and ask Mr. Hall the timescale on these things. Obviously, somebody comes along, they want to buy the plot, they've got to go through planning permission first of all, then they've got to find a builder, then they've got to build it, obviously arrange the finance as well. And what sort of timescale would you expect from start to finish for one of these things to go through?
To get detailed planning consent and to go through the process of getting the building warrant, we would assist with that. We recognise this is a fairly new and fairly novel idea, so we would assist and support potential self-builders by putting them in contact with how to find an architect, how to go through the process with specialist agencies like Build Store. We would help with putting the plot passport in place and explaining what that is and getting them through the planning process. We would put a restriction, so there's a series of, the approach would have a series of carrots and sticks, if you like. So from when they're ready to go, all the approvals are in place to build that out so that we don't have a situation where someone acquires a plot and it's sitting undeveloped in 10 years' time. We would put a restriction of roughly about 2 years, that they would have 2 years to build that, so that it's done more or less in tandem with the development, the bigger development that's taking place as well. Beyond that, there would be a series of fines or indeed a requirement to pay back the cost of the site, the cost of the plot, should they not develop it within the agreed timescale. But it would be covered by legal agreement. That would be pretty much tied up.
Bailey Williamson.
Thank you, convener. My question is about the drainage, so I don't know if you want to carry on taking questions to Campbell first and come back to me.
No, you're fine. We can carry on. Just
okay. I was just seeking a bit of clarity on the drainage system. According to the documents, the SEPA flood lockout outline is, I think, running on a 110-metre contour. And then when you go to the proposed layout, which includes the drainage plan, I just can't quite get my head around the top of the basin for the suds is 110 meters, 0.2, which looks a bit tight if the flood level starts at 110. The outflow is 108, etc. So I was just wondering if officer could maybe just provide a bit of clarity around that.
Sorry, thank you very much, Bailey Williamson. I've had the opportunity to liaise with my flooding colleagues. Obviously, we're reliant upon SEPA as well as them for input in respect of flooding matters, and obviously what they prepare in terms of mapping is indicative and it is subject to going through a rigorous assessment process, and obviously the applicant in this instance has done so with the provision of additional information in respect of flooding, which both SEPA and our flooding colleagues were ultimately satisfied with. But obviously, in terms of the topographical survey information that's been provided, that was all existing levels that were shown in grey, and the current level of where lands at the Sud Pond is about 109 metres. It will be lowered to between 108.6, 108.7 to create the basin, and the banks of the basin themselves are at a height of 110 metres over a fairly significant area as well. So the capacity of the Suds Basin itself is very large, and that the surface water from the basin will discharge into the pond at a level of 108.7, and that the outfall from the Suds Pond at the hydrobate is at 108.6 before discharging to the level of the ditch at 108.5 below. So ultimately, our colleagues and flooding instructors are more than satisfied with the information provided, but notwithstanding, there is a condition for a fully detailed SUD scheme to be submitted to and approved by ourselves in due course.
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Campbell, for that, for the information you've already given. Given trying to understand what the overall concept is, and I think I might achieve that on asking a specific question about profiteering. So the idea that somebody can get a plot at what is obviously an exceptionally good price, and they could then potentially develop it and sell it potentially for a reasonable profit. And that's not the idea of affordable housing. You want affordable housing in perpetuity, so future generations can benefit from it as well. Is there any UC burdens or anything, legal burdens or anything in there that can help make sure that this is, creating actual homes for people, affordable homes, rather than just creating a business opportunity for people?
I think first of all, in terms of back to carrots and sticks again, typically in with affordable self-build as well as market self-build, we would put a taper in. So usually a 5-year or a 10-year taper, whereby if someone does look to be profiteering within that, we would have a provision, a legal provision, to claw back the cost of the site. So that's where our role is fairly pivotal there as well. So we would, from if it's sold within a year, we would be looking for all of that, let's call it £50,000, to 5 years, it might be £10,000, or 10 years, it might be, and so on. What we know about self-build from the experience elsewhere in the UK is that typically families who are looking for self-build are looking to put down roots in a place. They're looking to be part of that community. They're looking to be, and that's kind of reflected in the fact that we would prioritise based on local connection. So, for example, you might have grown up in Scotland Well or a rural settlement in Perth and Kinross. went away to the city, got educated, you're working, you want to come back and start a family. The current housing market makes it very, very difficult if you're looking for an entry level property. So that again, I think, helps to balance the housing market rather than attract someone with a notion of profiteering. Also, we are aware of some interest in the village of people who wish to downsize. We had a very successful scheme in Kinross on the site of the old Windlestrae Hotel, where people and local people downsized, and thus freeing up larger family properties that were there or thereabouts at the Scottish national average market value of about 225,000. So that's not quite affordable. It's within reach, and it free. So we're killing two birds with the one stone there. And obviously, if someone from within the village or from within the wider Kinross housing market area wants to relocate there, to downsize there, then again, that's not likely to be somebody that's profiteering. So we would have in place some measures like the tapering, and also the concept is really aimed at achieving balanced communities, a balanced housing system, and people who want to settle and contribute to their community. We also have the option of placing a rural housing burden on the plots, which would have the effect of suppressing value and, as you alluded to, making it affordable in perpetuity. That's where that's quite a lot of explanation in that, but let's just say it's a mechanism which is used quite widely in the Highlands and Islands, and which we're proposing to use in other initiatives in Highland Perthshire to with that express aim.
Convener, can just a follow on to that question, please. Just so from a planning perspective, then do we have the ability to decide that within this committee, i.e., I like the idea of an in perpetuity for rural housing in somewhere like Scotland Well. Do we have the ability to set that within this planning application, or is that done separately through policy within the affordable housing?
Councillor Waters, I think it's in your report that a Section 75 agreement be required for the delivery of these plots. So much of what Mr Hall was talking about would go into the Section 75 agreement and covered in that way. So essentially, if you grant it, it's granted subject to Section 75, and that is where a lot of the detail of what you've heard will go into the agreement.
Campbell, within your answer, there were options available on how you want to develop the affordable plot scheme, and so within the Section 75, do we determine what can be in that Section 75 as part of this committee? Within the options that Campbell has covered within his presentation.
Councillor Waters, to come back on that, is the report is quite clear that what you're determining is, of course, the application. It's then subject to Section 75 if you go down that direction. But in terms of members' remit, that's about the headlines, and that's the affordable housing plots and open space contributions. The detail of much of which you've been advised on, that's something which is negotiated and dealt with behind the scenes. You couldn't, I'll rephrase it another way, you couldn't condition it because it's a lot of financial matters you couldn't put in conditions. They must go into the Section 75.
Maybe if I just step in, sorry, there, I think I'm understanding where you're coming from. And I think what Campbell's saying, and Campbell can certainly step in and correct me if I'm wrong, but a fairly substantive framework of mechanisms to ensure that adequate control is in place to see that this is an affordable option for housing delivery, not only in the short term, but a longer term would be in place. I think maybe what you're focusing on is on a particular aspect of that, which seems to be covered anyway under the supplementary guidance. So there'll be a complex framework of scenarios depending on what happens in the multitude of different situations that would cover the affordable housing element of this. And as Campbell was saying, there would be various mechanisms to ensure that people were selected properly, that their intentions were correct, that there wasn't profiteering, and that the property was retained over a period of time as affordable housing.
I'm still not sure I'm understanding fully what you know, if we're you know, for example, if we were minded to pass this application and we wanted to ensure that from the rural aspect you wanted affordability in perpetuity forevermore, then I understand fully with the Section 75, it's a legal agreement, and we're not going to set a legal agreement within this committee. But can we set the direction to sit and say within this committee that with this affordable housing, we want this as a committee, if minded, in perpetuity, i.e. there needs to be a protection which doesn't allow somebody even after 10 years to sell it for a nice healthy profit. It's not a stepping stone to get on the housing market, but it's about providing affordable housing within a community that needs affordable housing and will still do in 10, 20, 30 years. Then can we set that direction to sit and say that as a condition which needs to then be interpreted or you know, included in the Section 75, not going into the detail of the Section 75, but actually setting the direction of what we would want included. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying. You know, that we will set out in the Section 75 what the parameters are, and both in the short term, medium term, and longer term. I think Campbell's heard what you've said. That's what Campbell had, I think, fed back in the first place in any case. And the rural housing clause, etc., can be incorporated into that. And we will be mindful of that in your comments in relation to the preparation of the Section 75.
Apologies for being a wee bit obstinate here, but as a condition that actually says something in this committee that actually says, as officers, that you must do that.
Councillor Waters, can I draw your attention to the supplementary guidance? Supplementary guidance at 7.9 states that discounted service plots for self-build can also be contributed, particularly in rural areas. A clause can be inserted in the property deeds to ensure that the subsequent buyers are also eligible buyers, and or that within a certain time period, the discount is returned to the council. So it's within
with all respect, convener, it's still that can be done. You know what I want to say, it will be done, which are
we hear you loud and clear, and that will be undertaken in terms of the Section 75. I think maybe where the use of terminology here is maybe confusing somewhat. It will not be a condition applied to the planning permission, because it cannot be a condition, but a clause within the legal agreement will cover that issue, yes. And that has always been our intention.
Councillor Waters might give you more reassurance. I mean, there's a framework there, partly in the supplementary guidance. Also heard what you said today. Mr. Hall has explained it in a lot of detail. There's actually two protections. You've got the 75 agreement, but remember, these plots are the land is to be bought by Perth and Ross Council. So it's not just a Section 75 agreement. It will be the ownership and transferring over. So there will be controls there. So, but I think we're kind of giving answers from the podium. Maybe Mr. Hall wants to supplement. He's standing at the sidelines here, but he's heard whatever all's been said.
That the due diligence that we would have to undertake, we would have to fully consider every mechanism up to and including placing a rural housing burden on the title to ensure so far as possible that they remain affordable in perpetuity.
It's still that absolutely and it's still where that decision, as affordable housing team, you're given that assurance, and some of the stuff you mentioned, I think absolutely brilliant, and I think it is good to see this kind of thing from an affordability. But the remit of this committee to set that, I'm still not 110% sure that it's noted within the committee, and that then goes forward to affordable housing, which then sets the section 75 is really what we're saying. So, but then that's my opinion. It may not be the opinion of the whole committee, and that's what I'm trying to understand. So.
Absolutely hear what you're saying, and I think maybe as a bit of further clarity, legal agreements are very complex. And again, you might recall the letter that was issued by the chief planner a number of years ago, where you have burdens in terms of future use, etc., that can significantly adversely affect disproportionately the ability to obtain finance to do anything. So the bank may look at the detail of a clause, and if it is seen as being a significant burden, that can have a significant effect on anybody being able to borrow £1 from the bank, never mind what it might take to finance a project such as this. So we will look very carefully at ensuring that as far as is possible, this will be a robust way of maintaining affordable housing in perpetuity. But there are a number of factors that will need to be accounted for. If we're too specific at this point in time, that could undermine the ability to deliver anything.
100% happy with that response. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I do have 4 other questions, by the way.
Councillor Allen.
Thanks, Campbell. I've kind of forgotten whether you mentioned this or not, so forgive me. Would the council consider engaging with a builder to actually just build 6 affordable houses?
That would be more akin to a custom build development, where that's sort of somewhere between what a house builder might offer as a standard product, and the limitations of what you can customize it as is choosing the paint color of your living room or the door finishes in your kitchen, and some self-build being where the self-builder has a lot more control and can appoint an architect and can make it very much their dream home. It's certainly something that we could look at, because the work we've done on self-build is self and custom build, and we are coincidentally speaking to self-build companies, sort of custom build companies, custom build homes, who are an Edinburgh-based company within the next 4 to 6 weeks. So it's something, I can certainly explore with them as an option. So it gives that, maybe rather than going full blown into this, it's dipping a toe into it, so to speak. So certainly something we can look at, yeah.
Councillor Braun, your second question.
Oh, you caught me out there, convener. Yes, it was just a point when we were talking about soils earlier on, an assessment of soils. Is that a matter really for building standards rather than planning? I just wanted to clarify that point.
Yes.
That was brief. Thank you very much.
Councillor Cuthbert, you've got 2 questions.
Yes, thank you, convener. Moving on from the affordable housing, I'm looking at the peat question. I'm aware that NPF4's come into play now. Looking at the paperwork that I got access to, it seemed to imply that SEPA removed their objection to the peat on the 12th of April 2023. I'm aware that NPF4 probably came in later than that. No? Well, it came in before. Okay. I'm just wondering then, what was said by the Community Council was that the peat was found to be in prior place, was found to be 4 metres deep, but the test pits have only been done to 1 or 2 metres. So are we satisfied that the survey's been done well enough?
Thank you very much, Councillor Cuthbert. Yes, obviously this has been a key topic within the assessment of the planning application itself, and the application was accompanied by an original ground assessment, which was also supplemented with further investigatory work, and certainly through the information that was received, that the peaty top soil is a layer of peat between 0.2 and a metre, generally on average at 0.75 metres. And the intention is to remove all that peaty material from the site as part of the proposals. So certainly the depths of up to kind of 2.1 that were discussed earlier on have been adequate to address that it's going through to other material beyond. So we've had site-specific investigation here, which is satisfactory to yourselves and through SEPA.
Yeah, just is this question of if there's local knowledge that when a previous site just adjacent to it was done historically, they actually had to go down to 4 meters. And I'm just wondering whether it's layered and you've got sand and then peat and then sand and then peat. So I'm just worried that we're actually not getting a true picture on the peat.
There's been an investigation undertaken by a recognised expert in this field, fully qualified, and they've looked at it and found other deposits underneath and advised that that's their position. I think the concern is relating to construction and the cost of construction. The cost of construction is a matter for the developer. How the construction would be undertaken would require to be assessed through building regulations. But the evidence before us is that there isn't a significant issue of the extent that's been outlined by other parties, which may well have been the case in other locations with different scenarios, different depths, different locations, different levels, etc. But in relation to this site, the information available indicates that they are satisfied with the position set out by the ground investigation.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Again, I'll do the slightly more awkward one again. Just in the contribution with green space to the play park, given the play park's currently up for renewal just now, is there a time scope, or does it just go into a general fund with to upgrade it the next time it needs upgraded, or in however many years' time that is? How does that work?
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Obviously, the legal agreement would set out the full extent of the sum that's identified within the report. But obviously, the trigger for payments would be dependent upon completion rates of houses, I think, going forward. But we would bottom that out within the draft legal agreement in any case. But it's certainly been identified towards localised provision of improvements to local open space.
I think maybe just to supplement that, we've spoken with Green Space, and that's the mechanism that they're advising us is appropriate from their perspective and their programming.
And once the money's given over to Green Space, it stays there. It doesn't have to. There's no time thing that it gets returned if it isn't used.
The standard approach is that there's a 10-year time frame on that, but again, Green Space are advising that they would take that contribution. They've already thought about how they would spend it, and I would hope that they would be able to action that within a 10-year period.
Thank you. I see no further questions. Can I ask for a... Sorry, where am I seeing that? I thought I gave you 2.
Thank you, convener. My question is also on contributions, developer contributions. One of the big needs in Scotland Well is a safer route to school, and the current path from Scotland Well to the local primary school it's not a safe route. So would we be competent to put in a condition that there could be a contribution towards infrastructure of that sort within the community?
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. Obviously, we did liaise with our transportation colleagues as part of the planning application, and it was not flagged that would be a specific requirement of the site. Obviously, is allocated within the local development plan, which generally sets out other required infrastructure for any new development proposals. But I'm not sure whether Lachlan might wish to come in and make comment.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Councillor Cuthbert, for your question there. With regards to a contribution there, I am aware that the road safety team have been working with the community on a potential path route, which has had indicative routes proposed, but nothing further has come forward in terms of detailed design. They haven't been able to acquire any land for the project, so I'm not sure if that would have a bearing on any proposals being put forward.
I think that maybe making the point as well, this upgrading of path route through the site. We spoke about that in the presentation, and the retention of the hedge and things as well. But it's recognised that there are a lack of paths and things along rural roads, etc. But this application itself, which is allocated in the local development plan, doesn't have a requirement to make contribution towards that or to pay for it in a wider sense. I think of what Lachlan's saying there as well. The council are looking at it more roundly, and it is very complicated in order to deliver anything such as that. But the council continue to look at how they can deliver better connections in rural areas.
So from that, am I getting the message that this committee can't set a contribution for infrastructure such as roads? Because I think Richard and I are both aware that there is a need for a feasibility study on a route that's been identified by the Community Council, but they obviously need funding for that. And it would seem logical, if you're putting an extra 22 houses, 20% on the village, that there should be a contribution for that sort of thing.
It's not covered by the supplementary guidance as it stands. It's not within an area where the supplementary guidance covers that. You would also have to work out what the proportion responsibility for these 22 units are relative to the overall population that would benefit from the wider scheme. But I'm not sure if Colin's going to comment further.
Taking it more from my point of view, and I'm talking in general, then when you're wanting contributions, then you really should have that set out within your supplementary guidance or policy, which we do have. I've mentioned them earlier on, or site-specific requirements in an opportunity site in the LDP, and I've heard that isn't actually there. So to require this developer to do that, I think would be very problematic on this occasion. I would basically say that I would agree with you, yes, no, there's no power because you don't have the hook in the LDP or in policy to do that on this particular occasion. I'm not going to say that on other occasions, it depends.
Right, thank you everyone. I don't think there's any more questions. I'm getting a wee bit confused here. So I asked for a motion. Bailey McLaren, you put forward a motion.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I would like to move the recommendation from the officers to grant planning permission as is set out in our report of handling. Thank you.
Councillor James, do you want to second that?
Yes, more than happy to second, Convener. Pretty much the same as Bailey McLaren. You know, a lot of this information is available in the papers, which the officers have already gone into, and again, you know, we're talking about things that don't really concern us as a planning committee. We're looking at planning issues. More than happy with this going forward. Thank you.
I see we have an amendment from Councillor Braun.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. As a site goes, I'm more than happy with it as it stands, most of it. It's nicely laid out. I don't have an objection with that. My concern is the affordable housing side. I just don't think this is the way forward. We need affordable housing and we need it now. I don't think the concept of having 6 plots and waiting for people to come along is the way forward. Mr. Hall made some good points, and I understand what he's saying. He talked about people downsizing. He talked about people wanting to move back into the village, younger people. Of course they do, but that's not geared to self-build. They just want an affordable house, I think. So I don't think the argument stands either way on self-build. My view is that we need, as I say, we need affordable housing. We need it straight away. Having 6 plots left with people having to come along, go through the planning process. We know planning process can go straightforward. It can be complicated. This could drag on for some time. I just feel we need these houses in straight away. And I don't think the concept is in the spirit of Policy 20, which was that builders either make a commuter sum or they build the houses that we've always seen. And I don't like to use the word precedent in planning, as Mr. Elliott knows, but I think that we could instigate a precedent here that other builders will come along and say, well, there's the plots, thanks very much, and we'll leave it with you. And I don't think that is the way forward. I do really feel that we should stick to the principles that we've had, or the spirit of Policy 20, that the builder builds the plots or gives a commuter sum. So my thoughts here, Mr. Elliott, is that it's not in keeping with Policy 20. I don't know if there'll be anybody to second me, but we'll see how we go from there. Thank you, convener.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Braun's amendment? Go to the Councillor Watt.
Sorry, Joe, I was just given Councillor Braun's amendment there. I was just wanting to ask officers what the implications of that are. You know, is that almost a refusal of the application, that you would need to go back and re-look at it? Or is there a competent way to amend the application to allow affordable housing in there? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. And maybe just to clarify, the view of officers is that this does comply with Policy 20. It meets the requirements of the supplementary guidance and is perfectly acceptable and would see affordable housing delivered. So I don't know what more I can say in relation to that.
Can I ask for a seconder for Councillor Braun's amendment? No seconder.
This is what. Sorry, apologies again. I know I'm a wee bit annoying this meeting, but I'm not sure that quite answered my question. Is that, you know, if you know, as Councillor Braun's major element here is, rather than do the plots, he wants a social landlord, I assume, to come in and actually build the houses, as we often do with stuff. And it's given that we haven't looked at that as part of this application, is it a competent amendment to put forward to allow that done? And that's what I'm trying to gather. And whether a second them or not may be determined by that answer to that. And that's why I would quite like to have an answer to it. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Councillor Waters. I think, to be clear, what Councillor Braun is proposing is in essence refusal of the application. It could only be refusal. To consider, you couldn't amend the application to immediately allow for 6 affordable houses built on site immediately, not self-built but built on site. My words, I know, because simply that would be a different scheme that's not before you. You would have to refuse. Now, whether it's competent or not as a refusal motion is another matter, because I was about to get into that, in the sense of it's for Councillor Braun and any sector to put forward where the policies are breached and why. And as Mr. Smith has said, and has been said earlier on, actually, my understanding, what you're putting forward, Councillor Braun, is you're saying something that is, your position is actually contrary to policy. The supplementary guidance allows for self-builds. You're saying that's not acceptable, so it's actually yourself that's contrary to policy, and you need to be justifying that. So I think what we're looking at is, before you go into that, Councillor Braun, I think we need to see whether we've got a seconder or not.
Third time. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Braun's amendment? No seconders, so the amendment falls.
I'm happy to withdraw the amendment, convener. I appreciate it's probably a personal view to some extent, but I think, you know, as I said, we need affordable housing quickly, and I don't think this is the way forward. But I appreciate nobody wants to second it, so I'll happy to withdraw.
Thank you. Are there any more amendments? No more amendments. Therefore, planning permission is granted subject to conditions contained in the Porter Handling and the legal agreement. There is no further business, Don't need, Councillor James, you want to make a comment?
Yes, I do, please, convener. And it's I don't know how we get to make comments like this because it never comes up on our papers or gives us an opportunity to comment in public. However, decisions which are taken to the recorder and are overturned, despite the recent one, which in fact I think Councillor Braun moved to refuse the application. I think I seconded it, and it was from Marley Quarry in Kinloch. The recorders overturned it despite the 3 local councillors objecting, our committee objecting, and a huge public outcry. And it's not the first time. This is 2 quite large applications which have a huge impact on residents. And they lose the local input and the local knowledge, which I think is very, very key to any decision. And I just wanted to register my disappointment with legitimate local decisions being overturned by the recorder. Thank you, convener.
Thank you. Your comments noted. Thank you. There's no further business today, so thank you everyone for attending.